Okay, hello everybody. I see a bunch of people are joining us as I speak. My name is Michael Gaskill with Coast Range Association and the Oregon Ocean Alliance. And hopefully you're hearing this lively music to keep you company for the next couple minutes because we expect a bunch more people to join. So we're just going to take that couple extra minutes to make sure everybody gets a chance to get situated before we get going. And while we are waiting for folks to join, you're going to hear me say this a couple times, but please feel free to use the chat now throughout the webinar to put in questions, comments, or thoughts. And we will get to as many questions at the end of the webinar as we can. So we'll get started with introductions in just a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to get going here in just a second. I'm going to toggle over and turn down the music, fade us out here. Okay, I think we are still going to have folks join us, but let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining this Oregon Ocean Alliance webinar. My name is Michael Gaskill with Coast Range Association and the Oregon Ocean Alliance. I use he, him pronouns, and I am going to be just giving us a quick little overview of what we're going to be going through today, and then I'm going to be throwing it to much more intelligent, thoughtful, and well-spoken people to guide you through the Oregon Ocean Alliance and our priorities. So here we go. So a couple quick reminders right at the top. You should have access to a Q&A chat function, and definitely use that to ask any and all questions you might have. We'll be trying to address questions as able throughout the webinar, and we will spend as much time at the end going through questions as possible as well. So please throw questions in the chat as much as you can and as much as you want. This meeting is also being recorded, so just FYI. Like I mentioned, we will have time at the end for questions, but don't wait to ask those questions until the end. And so we are going to do quick introductions from our speakers, and then we're going to jump into our key priorities for the Alliance. And that's going to include our conservation priorities like rocky habitats bill and an eelgrass bill, as well as marine reserves and Heceta Head. And we're going to get into how you can help make a difference for our oceans. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll have time for questions. So with that, unless there's something I miss, Annie, I'm going to give the floor to Annie Merrill of Oregon Shores and Joe Liebezeit of Bird Alliance.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's actually gonna come to me right now and then Annie in a little bit. But yeah, welcome everybody. My name's Joe Liebeside. I'm with the Bird Alliance of Oregon, and I'm just gonna end this one slide here just to let you know about our alliance. So the Oregon Ocean Alliance, we formed just about a year ago. And all where you can see the different organizations that were made up here. It's 7 Capes Bird Alliance, going from the logo on the left to the right. Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, my organization, Bird Alliance of Oregon, Surfrider Foundation, Coast Range Association, the one Michael works for, Environment Oregon, the Nature Conservancy, and Oceana. So why don't we have everybody in the alliance that's on this call, on the panel today, make yourself visible and wave to the crowd, and you can see we are all people with all different organizations. And we have been working together for many years. A lot of us have been working together for a long time on ocean issues. But the reason we formed the alliance is because we just wanted to be more coordinated and proactive and raising awareness on ocean and marine issues, and ultimately moving forward in some of the conservation needs in the coastal and marine space. It's we work a lot in Salem on state legislation, and oftentimes marine and coastal issues are not front and center. So we're here to change that, because we all love our ocean and we know it's important, but it's under threat by things like climate change and other impacts. In this photo here, you can see last legislative session, we were able in our alliance to move forward legislation for our Marine Reserve Program, which we're really happy about. So you can see some of us here in this picture with Governor Kotek and members of the Coastal Caucus and some other legislators. So I will stop there, and everybody can hide themselves now in the Oregon Ocean Alliance, and we're going to go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Joe. So my name is Annie Merrill. I'm the Marine Conservation Manager at Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition and the other co-chair of the Oregon Ocean Alliance. So our work as an alliance started by identifying 5 priorities that all of our organizations care about, which include marine reserves, Hecate Bank, rocky habitats, kelp and eelgrass, and funding for ocean conservation. I'm going to quickly run through these priorities, but we're going to do a deeper dive into rocky habitats and eelgrass meadows because they're the focus of our 2025 legislative campaign and really deserve a spotlight tonight. Next slide, please. All right, so first, the overarching priority is to use our collective resources and networks to help identify and leverage new sources of federal, state, and private funding to benefit ocean conservation efforts on the coast. In general, we want to see more investment in understanding, managing, and protecting our ocean resources. And of course, this is more important now than ever, given the threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. Next slide. The remainder of our priorities are related to specific ocean habitats and place-based conservation areas. So we advocate for habitat conservation because it offers multiple benefits simultaneously in protecting biodiversity, supporting entire ecosystems, and multiple species at the same time, which include, threatened and endangered species. And they also enhance ecosystem services and benefit people. So by focusing on habitats, it's somewhat strategic in bringing together multiple co-benefits. So our first habitat is marine reserves. Many of our organizations have long been supporters of Oregon's network of marine reserves and marine protected areas, and we advocated for the initial designation of these sites over a decade ago. But this work is not over, and we still want to see the program grow and flourish. So right now, funding for our Marine Reserve Program is threatened by budget cuts to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we really want to see continued investment in this program, as well as more sustainable long-term investments that are not subjected to frequent budget cuts. So that's something we're advocating for, and we just really believe that this program is too important for the state to deprioritize. All right, so the next habitat priority is Hecata Bank. And Hecata Bank is a unique geological site about 35 miles off the coast of Cape Perpetua. And this rocky reef shelf is one of the most biologically productive regions in the East Pacific. And it's a hotspot for a diversity of marine species. So it's super important. Yet I'd wager that few people on this call even know about it because it's so far off of our coast. It's not something that we can interact with very readily. Um, and so, as an alliance, we are laying the groundwork to seek future protections for this site. And this all starts with public education on why this place is important. We need to, educate people on why the place matters in order to mobilize change and aim to protect it in the future. So I really encourage folks to learn more about Hecata Bank. You can go to our website and do a deeper dive there. Our next habitat priority is kelp forests. We're really concerned about the state of Oregon's kelp forests because these are critical habitats on our coast. But the Oregon Kelp Alliance has found that over 2/3 of our kelp forests have disappeared in the last decade. And we, as an alliance, are investigating ways that we can help support kelp restoration and conservation efforts going forward. So that's something we're going to be turning our attention to in the years to come. And last habitat priority is rocky habitats. So again, our legislative efforts relate to the last two habitat priorities, rocky habitats and eelgrass. So I'm gonna pass it over to Kent and Joe to talk about rocky habitats first.
Thanks, Andy. Rocky habitats are one of our priority areas, and rocky habitats comprise 41% of our coastline. They include the headlands, tide pools, rocky beaches, cliffs, offshore rocks, and it also extends outward to the territorial sea limit. So it includes reefs and islands. Next. Take a moment and think about the first time you gazed into a tide pool. To me, it's like looking into another universe. And I ask that because I encourage you to engage both your mind and your heart as we talk about conservation action. To make things happen in the legislature, it requires passion, and I hope you all can bring that to this. Next. Rocky habitats, what are they? It's areas in the nearshore environment that have a hardened substrate, whether that be bedrock, boulders, or cobbles. Includes intertidal zones between the high and the low tide, and subtidal areas out to the territorial sea limit. There's a plethora of agencies that manage rocky habitats for Oregon. The nearshore environment, intertidal areas managed by Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. The subtidal areas below the mean and low tide is managed by Department of State Lands. And you've got ODFW manages and sets harvest regulations for fish, shellfish, and does a lot of research and monitoring and manages the marine reserves. The offshore islands and rocks are actually federal lands, and they're part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Oregon Island National Wildlife Refuge. Then you've got also a host of other agencies that manage various resources. So it's management of it is complex. Next slide. This management for the state agencies of Rocky Habitat falls under the umbrella of the Rocky Habitat Management Strategy, which is part of the territorial plan. This document provides policies, management principles, directions for strong site-based management. And an important component of it is that it balances protection with the enjoyment and use of Oregon's tide pools and other rocky habitats. The strategy was recently updated, and that includes, and that update includes opportunity for community groups to propose sites that they believe need special management. Next. So why protect rocky habitats? First off, the intertidal area has incredibly high biodiversity and just some amazing creatures that are well adapted with unique life histories to this, what seems like a harsh environment, but it is actually quite fragile. Next. Rocky habitats are home to over 1 million nesting birds and winter foraging seabirds, like the harlequin who overwinters here. And on the right, common meadows colony. Next. Pinnipeds use rocky shelves for feeding, shelter, feeding, and reproduction. Next. So you can see there's just a lot of wildlife within this habitat. Our rocky habitats are important for fish and fisheries too. The intertidal areas are nurseries for a lot of important commercial fisheries, and the underwater reefs provide complex habitat for fish and are areas that commercial and recreational fishermen target. Next. A lot of people come to the Oregon coast to recreate, and rocky habitats are one of the big draws. This is a $2 billion industry for the coast, so rocky habitats are part of the important economy for us. Next. Scientists use rocky habitats as living laboratories to better understand ocean environment, its ecology, and particularly how climate change is affecting the system. The next. So I'm going to, we've talked a little bit about what rocky habitat is and what it does. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Liebezet, and he will talk a little bit about some of the threats to it and what we're doing about that.
Thanks, Ken. Again, my name's Joe Liebezet with Bird Alliance of Oregon. And yeah, so Kent gave you a great kind of overview of why rocky habitats are so important for wildlife and for our ecosystem here in Oregon, and also for our economy. But there are some pretty big threats to our rocky habitats. One of them is climate change, and you may have heard of ocean acidification, or the increasing acidity of our oceans affects things like the ability of shellfish to generate carbon calcinate on their shells. Also, there's been a lot of research recently indicating that marine heat waves have been increasing and threatening the intertidal life, and really they're kind of at an ecological tipping point, is what researchers from OSU have been finding. And another major threat to wildlife and marine life on our rocky shores is increasing disturbance, and a lot of that is driven, unfortunately, by people. It's typically done when people are just unaware of the proper way to recreate on our rocky habitats and to explore tide pools, which we encourage, but needs to be done in a way that minimizes impacts to wildlife. Can you go back to the other slide, please? So you can see this picture here of someone from Haystack Rock Awareness Program, which is a designated rocky habitat site where we do have some capacity right now, where we have volunteers and other members that are employed to educate the public, because we've got millions of people literally coming to, especially our north coast, places like Cannon Beach, to recreate. And we need, if we have boots on the ground, people that can actually educate people about the wonders of rocky habitats, but also let them know how to enjoy them in a sustainable way. That's what we're going for here. So go ahead to the next slide. So there are 3 types of rocky habitat designations that came out of that rocky habitat management strategy that Kent mentioned, that was recently updated a couple of years ago. So we have marine education areas, and there the focus is education, and there are several of them on the coast. Cannon Beach has Haystack Rock, which is a great example. They're also called marine gardens. Another type of designation is a marine research area. And in these places, the focus is for marine research, and finally marine conservation areas where the focus is conservation. The thing that ties all these sites together in terms of like regulation is that there are stronger regulations around harvest of invertebrates, things like shellfish, as well as marine plants. And there are also a lot of non-regulatory mechanisms that are set in place by the Rocky Habitat Strategy to pretty much bring us to stewardship of these sites. As I mentioned before, getting boots on the ground, signage, and things to help people understand these sites and why they're so important and sensitive, and how to recreate in them responsibly. So go ahead to the next slide. So about a year ago, 8 new sites were designated for protection. That includes 6 new marine conservation areas, 2 new marine gardens, and 1 marine, or I think actually, yeah, 5 marine conservation areas, 2 marine gardens, and 1 marine research area. You can see here on the slide where they are. They range from up on the north coast in Ecola Point, down to Black Lock Point and Cape Blanco on the south coast, and Coquille Point. And the problem is that these sites are poorly resourced at this point in time. There is not a lot of agency capacity, nor is there capacity for friends groups and other coastal community organizations to kind of implement the Rocky Habitat Management Strategy and make sure that these sites are managed and maintained success in a successful way. Go ahead to the next slide. So this legislative session, we put forward a bill. It's called the Rocky Habitat Stewardship Bill. It's currently still a legislative concept, but any day now it will get a House bill number. And what this bill does, it basically has 2 components to it. It will fund the Department of Land Conservation Development to have a Rocky Habitat Coordinator. As you saw on the slide before that Kent showed, there are many different agencies responsible for management of rocky habitats. And so we really need to have a point person in an agency to kind of make sure all the agencies are coordinated in the management of these sites and regulation of these sites. There's also the ability in the future for more sites to be designated or to be amended, existing sites to be amended, or for sites to be deleted from as designated sites. So there needs to be a process for that, and we need the agencies to do that. Right now, there isn't that capacity. There's a there's a Rocky Habitat Coordinator right now, but her position will end in a few months, and it's not permanent. So we need that position to be permanent. The other thing we want to do is establish a community grants program so that community groups, different friends groups on the coast, can apply to get funding to get folks to administer volunteer programs and to do education and outreach and stewardship at these different rocky habitat sites. And so we're asking for a $300,000 biennium grant fund that would be open for competition among these groups up and down the coast to do this kind of work. And it would be housed in the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. So that's it for Rocky Habitats, and we hope you'll support this bill. And I'm gonna next pass it back to Annie Merrill, or to Ian Giancarlo, I think, to talk about eelgrass. And that's the other big priority we have in the legislative session.
Thanks, Joe. Everyone, nice to meet you all, I guess, virtually. My name is Ian Giancarlo. I'm the Oceans Advocate with Environment Oregon. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about one of our habitat priorities around eelgrass meadows and talk about why they're important. Next slide, please. So this is a video, so just play it. But this is, I'll just let it play out, but this is video, underwater video of an eelgrass meadow. This is typically what you would see in a healthy estuary in Oregon, in somewhere like Yaquina Bay or Coos Bay. We have over 20 estuary systems throughout Oregon, and so this is kind of just what it looks like. And And in a couple other slides, I'll talk a little bit about why it's super important. I don't think you need to play the whole thing, Michael. It's kind of just to give people an idea of what it looks like. Awesome. So eelgrass is really has a lot of superpowers in many ways, and it's considered essential fish habitat by NOAA because it provides nursery grounds for many juvenile species that are important for our fisheries in Oregon, like salmon and rockfish, for example. And by conserving eelgrass, we can safeguard coastal communities, support these fisheries, as well as recreational fishers and other recreational industries on the coast. And we can really bolster connections between marine and freshwater food webs. So this photo here, I think, kind of gives a good example of kind of what, or at least a graphic of what a healthy estuary with eelgrass would look like, where there's a lot of shellfish, there's juvenile fish, eelgrass, and then boats and things like that that can fish and gather fish responsibly. But we can go to the next slide. Eelgrass itself is also an indicator for an overall ecosystem's health. And that is because it forms the base of marine food webs, helps filter water, and provides food and oxygen for the surrounding area. So the graphic here shows just a couple of critters that really rely on healthy eelgrass ecosystems. And really without them, they themselves would fall apart and really the ecosystem would kind of come undone. So by conserving eelgrass, it's really important to understand that we can support marine biodiversity, also improve water quality. Next slide. So in addition to the habitat benefits that eelgrass provides, it also helps mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. So there is some research right now that suggests that it can store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere up to 35 times faster than tropical forests. And it can protect shorelines from strong storms and erosion because it stabilizes sediment, and it also helps buffer ocean acidification by storing carbon. So again, by conserving eelgrass, we can help build coastal resilience and also help Oregon meet our carbon reduction goals. In the graphic here, just another one of eelgrass. But the last thing that I'm going to talk about is kind of why eelgrass is threatened. So kind of globally, eelgrass is on the decline at around 7% per year. And this is also happening on the Pacific coast, and in some areas, it's much more rapid. So for example, scientists in Coos Bay have found alarming declines of eelgrass meadows in recent years. I believe some research I've seen estimates that there's been some estuaries in Oregon, and I think Coos Bay is one of them that's had almost 50% loss to eelgrass cover. And some of the primary threats to eelgrass and all the benefits they provide are water pollution and sedimentation, coastal development that gets too close and impacts the estuary, warming ocean waters and climate change, as well as invasive species such as European green crabs, as well as other diseases. Next slide. And then I'm going to hand it off to Annie now to talk about the management challenges that we've had with eelgrass before.
Great, thank you for that primer, Ian. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what some of the management challenges are and what we're hoping to do about it. So from our perspective, eelgrass has largely been overlooked in state policy, and there are a number of management challenges that really need to be addressed in order to effectively combat the loss of habitat. So the first one, aside from South Slough Estuarine Research Reserve in Coos Bay, eelgrass meadows are very infrequently monitored, and there's very little information about the status of eelgrass resources across the state. So right now, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has the resources and money to map one estuary about once every 10 years. And this is incredibly infrequent. This means that we would be decades behind in catching any significant change or loss to a once present and healthy meadow. and you essentially can't effectively manage a resource if you don't have enough information. So that's one big gap. Second, much of Oregon state policy surrounding eelgrass is around the mitigation of impacts from development or some kind of degradation. And so this is overseen by the Department of State Lands and their mitigation policies. However, researchers are finding that mitigation projects and restoration projects are largely unsuccessful in recovering impacted eelgrass, and it can be around a success rate of 13%. So we really need state policy to set targets for conservation first and foremost, and not solely focus on mitigation. There are also a number of outdated policies that allow for significant disturbance of eelgrass. So these kinds of policies need to be looked at. Third, our local estuary management plans, which regulate estuarine activities, are around 40 years old, and they no longer reflect the current conditions of our estuaries. Yet these management decisions are frequently made that impact eelgrass with these old plans. So the information is outdated, the maps are hand-drawn, and there's a lot of management challenges there. And then fourth, to our knowledge, there is no coordinated effort like there is with the Oregon Kelp Alliance, which focuses on kelp forests. There's no coordinated effort when it comes to conserving eelgrass meadows. And we really need coordination from agencies, partners, and stakeholders in order to effectively solve some of these challenges, particularly because the resource is managed by multiple agencies and local governments. So coordination is a gap. There are also new and emerging threats to eelgrass that aren't so easy to solve in silos. So if different agencies are doing different things, but they're not working together, this means that it's not effectively solving a whole ecosystem problem. So this really requires some technical expertise, focused attention, and again, coordination to figure out how best to support resilient ecosystems in eelgrass meadows. And I suppose in summary, there are all kinds of initiatives to support really like other important habitats like forests and wetlands, but never has this kind of attention been given to eelgrass. And we really saw this gap, and we wanted to get the ball rolling before it's too late and before our eelgrass meadows are in severe decline. So next slide, please. With all of these management challenges in mind, the Eelgrass Action Bill was born. And this bill we've been working on with chief sponsor, Representative David Gomberg, to help catalyze coordinated action to develop eelgrass management challenges, or to address eelgrass management challenges. So the bill, in essence, it directs the Department of Land Conservation and Development to convene an eelgrass task force, which consists of state agency representatives, scientists, tribes, and stakeholders to get together and look more closely at eelgrass policy. So the cost of this would be around $400,000 for a staff position at DLCD, who would lead the task force and conduct stakeholder engagement over the next 2 years. So I know that number looks big on paper, but this really is a small investment considering the importance of this habitat for supporting entire marine ecosystems, sequestering carbon, cleaning water, all of the benefits that Ian described. They really do have, an economic benefit for coastal communities. So this small investment has really large payoffs considering the value of this resource. So what would this task force do? First, it would assess the status of eelgrass in Oregon's estuaries and develop conservation and restoration targets for the state to meet by 2040. So these targets need to be science-based, and they need to match the level of observed habitat decline. So the concept is that they're ambitious enough to make a real difference in terms of conservation, but also practical and rooted in science. The task force is also directed to evaluate policy barriers and environmental challenges to meeting these targets. So this could include topics related to water quality, restoration, leasing and permitting of estuary lands, agency coordination, and more. So the task force would also need to review monitoring and mapping programs and make recommendations on technical improvements aimed at increasing the frequency of mapping, the quality and quantity of our data. And this is all really important for ensuring that agencies and partners can track their progress in meeting the statewide targets. It also benefits eelgrass management more broadly in the long term, but it also benefits scientists and folks that are looking at trends in eelgrass decline across the whole Pacific coast, where right now there is a gap in Oregon and we don't fully understand. And then the task force will also identify areas where we need more information to help direct research towards whatever gaps we need to fill. And then last, the task force would identify how much money it would cost to implement the conservation goals so that the legislature can actually fund these initiatives and make it happen. So the goal of all of this background work is for the task force to make direct recommendations to the legislature on how to improve eelgrass management. And this whole task force study will give us direction on what we need to advocate for to ensure that the state can actually meet those conservation goals, and it gets everybody on the same page about what needs to be done. And really that's it. So those are the first steps that we think are required to proactively address eelgrass decline and to protect this resource for generations to come. But it is just the first foundational step of many steps, because again, no work has been done on eelgrass to date. So we're really excited this bill has gained momentum and bipartisan support. So here is the list of bill sponsors to date. It's chiefly sponsored by Representative Gomberg and Representative Javity, who are both members of the Coastal Caucus. We're also really grateful, for their leadership on this important issue, and we hope to build even more awareness and support through the legislative process. So even if we don't pass the bill this year, our hopes are that the legislature will be a lot more informed about the value of eelgrass. They'll understand some of the policy gaps and what needs to be done in future years. And so one more note is that both of these bills, the Eelgrass Action Bill and the Rocky Habitat Stewardship Bill, have not been introduced just yet and are being finalized as we speak. So we don't actually have the bill numbers yet. So that's one caveat, but if you follow along with the Oregon Ocean Alliance, we will fill you in on all of the information. We'll send you bill numbers as soon as they're available so that you can track these bills and see what's going on. So now I'm going to pass it to Charlie from Surfrider to talk a little bit more about how to get involved.
Thanks, Annie. As Annie said, I'm Charlie Plyben. I'm the Oregon Policy Manager for Surfrider Foundation. And because this is legislative work, we're going to talk a little bit about legislation, how it moves, how you contact legislators, how you provide public testimony. Even though the bills haven't been introduced yet, there are some things that we kind of know, and I'm going to walk through some of that this evening and kind of give you guys an idea. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague who's actually going to help you take some action tonight. We're actually going to ask that folks download a postcard for us and write a love letter this Valentine's Day to your legislator. So we'll finish up with that and kind of talk a little bit more about how we can get you all involved immediately and tonight. So next slide, please. So I'll just start a little bit with the legislative pathway and kind of how this works. And sorry for the clunky slide here, but stepping back, we have two bills. We have one for Rocky Habitat Stewardship that's helping manage areas that have already been designated as conservation areas that we know are important and need more investments for management and monitoring. We have another bill aimed at setting better conservation targets for eelgrass habitats. So two different bills. These will be introduced probably within the next week. We'll probably have bill numbers within the next week. But the first step is the bill sponsor, which the chief sponsor in this case is Representative Gomberg of both bills. We'll introduce the bill. The Speaker of the House will assign it to a committee, a policy committee. That's that second box that it goes to. And in this case, it's the House, because it was introduced in the House. It will go to a House Policy Committee. That committee is likely going to be the House Committee on Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water. It could go to the Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee, but we're pretty sure it's going to end up in Helms Committee, which is the House Committee on Ag, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water, and I'll talk you through how to track and follow that. From there, both bills will get referred to what's called Ways and Means. Ways and Means is a budget committee. You can think of it like appropriations at the federal level. Any bill that costs money has what we call a fiscal attached to it. Any bill that has any sort of money attached to it or costs money will end up in the Ways and Means process. And because right now we're all operating on a forecasted budget, a predicted budget, a lot of bills that cost money and end up in Ways and Means will sit for a while. So we'll probably have one opportunity for a public hearing in the House Policy Committee, which we'll be all calling on you guys to provide some testimony. And then it'll sit after it gets referred out of that committee, rather uneventfully, probably till May or June in Ways and Means. And this is where we'll really need folks' support. All bills that cost money are very competitive. There's a lot of things that requires the legislature's investments, a lot of social issues, a lot of environmental issues, a lot of other policy issues. And so this is all competition at this point in time. So we'll need a lot of people, a lot of voices advocating to that Ways and Means Committee, essentially saying that this is a policy area that we want to see prioritized for investments. Because this is a joint committee, the Ways and Means Committee has both House members and Senate members in it. That means it won't go to the Senate for a policy committee. It'll actually go straight to the floor. That's good news. Once it gets out of Ways and Means, it's kind of smooth sailing. It'll have a floor vote in both the Senate and the House. And then from there, provided it passes both of those chambers, it will go on to the governor's office. So I'll talk a little bit about how you can kind of track this. All of this isn't important to remember. It's just kind of a good idea of how it's going to work. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to walk you through how to actually track this bill or both of these bills. And so, Michael, are you able to pull up the Oregon Legislative Information System website for me?
How's this looking?
Perfect. If you're able to zoom in at all, just a little bit, that would be great. But if not, I think I can see it well enough to instruct you. This is called the Oregon Legislative Information System. You will hear a lot of lobbyists and other folks refer to it as OLIS. That's an acronym shorthand. But this is your clearinghouse for everything that's happening during the legislative session. Where you're looking right now is the landing page, and you can see if Michael scrolls his mouse over the first little meetings today and presses the arrow, you can see these are all meetings that happened today. These are all committee meetings where bills were being heard, public hearings were being had, work sessions otherwise. You can watch these. So that middle column, you can sit there and watch from your own home. You can sit there in your fuzzy pants and with your favorite pet in your lap and a latte and participate in the legislative process, which is one of the cool things about OLIS. But this homepage sort of is a clearinghouse for everything happening today. Go ahead and reduce that. Yeah, perfect. So you can see different things that are happening in different committees. If you go up to and scroll over bills, click on that. This is where you're going to look up a bill. So let's say you wanted to look up the eelgrass bill and you don't know the number of that bill. You'll see there's 3 tabs there: bill number, bill text, and bill sponsor. If you just clicked on bill text and you typed in eelgrass, that bill would, it's not going to pop up right now because it hasn't been introduced, but that bill would pop up. I know a bill number, and so I'm going to go to a bill that's actually active right now and show you what it's going to look like when one of those bills is actually active. And so let's put in 2978 under bill number for me on OLIS there. All right, this is a bill that looks at wildlife crossings. This is not a bill that we are necessarily working on. I mean, some of our groups are, but not the Ocean Alliance. And this is what a bill will look like. So one of those bills, once introduced, it will have a page dedicated to it just like this. If you're interested in tracking that bill, up in the right-hand corner, you'll see e-subscribe. If you click on e-subscribe and put in your email address, anytime that bill, one of these bills is scheduled for a hearing, anytime it moves from one committee to the next, you'll get an email notification, and it'll give you a notification early enough that if you wanted to provide testimony, you could provide testimony on one of these bills. Let's go back to that bill page again. So again, on this page, you can kind of see everything about that bill. Besides subscribing to it, you can see who the sponsors are. At the tabs at the top, you can click on the actual text of the bill and read the bill itself. You can look at what amendments have been introduced. Click on testimony for me real quick. Now you can see a lot of testimony that's been submitted. This is actually a really important part of the process, is submitting written testimony for the record. Now, all these folks that you see here have supplied written testimony. Some of these folks may have showed up for the hearing process itself and been in Salem. But I bet you a lot of people did this at home, maybe with their soft pants on, drinking their latte, and with their fuzzy cat in their lap as well. So it's one of these cool things about OLS is it allows us to participate, submit testimony and otherwise. But go back to the homepage for the bill again, back to the overview. Perfect. So again, this is the clearinghouse for where that bill is going to be, and you can track it. You can follow along. Click on measure or click on scheduled events or measured history down at the bottom for me. Click on the measure history tab. All right, right here is where this is a bill that has a public hearing scheduled. You can see that that bill is scheduled for a hearing, I believe on Wednesday. And you can see on the right-hand side, register to testify. That's if you wanted to present testimony either from your computer at home, online, orally, or if you wanted to go to Salem and testify, you could register to testify right there. We're not asking people to turn out to Salem and testify on this bill. There probably won't be a lot of time in either one of these policy committees for that. What we would ask for you to do, though, is that right-hand tab, which is submit testimony, where you can easily submit written testimony, and we'll have some more guidance on how you can do that. But again, this is one example of a bill, how you can track it, have stuff sent to you, and then how you can actually submit testimony for the record from the comfort of your own home, or even orally testify from your computer at home. And they'll send you instructions and the webinar sort of information for when those committees will actually allow you to turn on your computer screen and start talking to them the same way I'm talking to you this evening. So that's sort of how these bills are going to move, a little bit about how you can track them. Because this is all what's going to happen in the future, we wanted to give you something that you can do now. And talking about eelgrass protection and talking about rocky habitat stewardship and reaching out to your legislators now is possible, even though we don't have bill numbers. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Kaya next, and we'll go to our next slide, or end your screen share and go back to the slideshow, Michael. And I'm going to let Kaya take over for this next slide and talk about how you can talk to your legislators right now.
Hi, everyone. So good to be here with you tonight. My name is Kaya Hazard. I'm the Oregon Regional Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. So as Charlie was saying, because these bills haven't been scheduled yet, there are no hearings at the moment, though testifying or sending in written testimony will be a really important component very soon. So for tonight, we put together some postcards that you can send to your legislators to let them know why these ocean habitats are important to you and why you care about these issues. So you can find your legislator, if you don't already know, on the state website. So I'll drop that link in the chat. And then you can download our postcards in this next link. So feel free to kind of get creative with it. There's a document in that folder with a little bit of guidance. And really the most important thing is to speak from the heart and let your reps know that these are special and important places, and let them know like what we stand to lose if we don't protect these places. And this is something that you can do right now. You can download these postcards and you can mail them in, or you can even email them to your legislators. So if we would love for you all to do this tonight or this week, and then be on the lookout for those hearings being scheduled later on.
Valentine's Day is popular in the Capitol for everybody advocating their issues, and we want to make sure that we're sharing love for our ocean. So we encourage everybody to download a postcard this evening if you're able to. If you need guidance or help or support on that, feel free to reach out to us at Surfrider or any of the other Alliance members this evening on panel. I think I'm turning it back over to Michael.
Okay. Hey, that was great, everyone. Give yourselves a pat on the back. I learned a lot there, which maybe shows how much I'm paying attention in our regular meetings, or maybe everybody just stepped it up with their presentations today. We have some great questions in the Q&A. So just a reminder to everybody, put those questions in the Q&A. That'll probably be easier than having you all unmute and ask your questions, but we may be able to make that function work as well. So let's see. There are some of our panelists answering questions in that Q&A chat, but I'll just start running through some of them. So Cloud asked about what are the limits to rocky habitat protection, and asked, are there opposing groups? And it looks like Joe might be typing an answer, but Joe, if you want to unmute and just say your answer, feel free.
Thanks, Michael. I'm happy to answer that. So there has not been a concerted opposition to the rocky habitat sites. There initially, when we were working on the site designations, there was some concern from some fishing groups about the sites, but I think in conversations with those folks, we were able to kind of quell concerns. The rocky habitat sites are really focused on invertebrate and marine plant harvest in terms of regulation, not on so much on fish. We also have the backing of the Ocean Policy Advisory Council, which is a body made up of fishing interests, conservation, tribes, community members that all kind of make recommendations to the governor's office. And every member of OPAC, back when the rocky habitat sites were being decided upon and when the plan, the management strategy was voted on, all members were supportive of it and actually recommended to the governor's office to provide the proper support from the agency side to implement these sites. In terms of what are the limits on rocky habitat sites, there are criteria that have been developed through the rocky habitat process to nominate sites, and there are criteria in terms of how do we designate, what's taken into consideration in terms of decisions made about those sites, things about amount of biodiversity, use by people, proximity to people, and there is a rubric around that. And when there will be another, there was a, as I mentioned before when I talked, there was a process for folks to submit applications and nominate these sites, and it goes through OPAC, it goes through, and it will go in the future through a technical group to evaluate these sites, and there will be a decision made. So that's, in a nutshell, the process for that.
Thanks, Joe. So I see that some folks are having their questions answered in the Q&A, and that is great. I'm going to put together a couple questions about eelgrass, and this could be for maybe Ian or Annie. So Crispy asked, is there still value in submitting Coast Watch miles reports on eelgrass accumulations observed on the beach? And then Joe Marks also asked, is the loss of eelgrass in Coos Bay from dredging? So different but related questions. Annie or Ian, do either of you feel like taking that?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. Those seem like Oregon Shores questions. Yeah, so as part of our Coast Watch program, we have asked folks to document any observed eelgrass, like piles observed on beaches. And this is largely because we got reports of frequent dredging in and around like the Tillamook Bay area. And this is largely due to mechanical harvest of oysters. There is always value in documenting changes to our coastline and documenting particularly large piles of eelgrass, but this time of year, it's not as important because eelgrass naturally senesces and will die off during the winter months. So it's not as necessary, but we still like to connect or collect information about what we're observing on our beaches. So that's one thing. The decline that's been observed in Coos Bay, it sounds like it is largely related to water quality concerns. In particular, eelgrass is really sensitive to warming ocean waters, and so in the event of a heat wave of some kind, or a marine heat blob, that can certainly impact eelgrass meadows and has been known to cause waves of decline. And it might come back again after conditions are more suitable. But at least in Coos Bay, there's been over a decade of monitoring occurring, and there have been large declines observed. And I'm actually not sure what the current status is of those eelgrass meadows and whether or not they've like bounced back or what have you. But yeah, so water quality is one of those challenges. Dredging, development of our estuaries can be impactful, and also impacts in the watershed. So, things like forest practices, logging, that essentially lead to more sedimentation in our estuaries can really impact eelgrass, because the sediment it increases turbidity and it reduces the ability for light to be able to reach the eelgrass meadows, which are submerged underwater, which means that they can't photosynthesize. So that's certainly a problem as well.
Annie, that answer was another ringing endorsement for why we need this eelgrass bill passed, is that there are just a lot of questions still unanswered and a lot of information that we need to be finding out. You got a lot of exclamation marks for that explanation by someone in the chat, by the way. So excellent. And yeah, we're having great feedback in the webinar chat for thanking all of our panelists for such a great job. We're almost at 7, but we can definitely spend a little bit longer asking questions. So I haven't seen any new questions for a bit, but you can still put questions in the chat if you like, and we can stay after 7. So questions that we haven't gotten to yet include from Steve Griffiths. This webinar is terrific. Thank you, Steve. How often can we expect to hear from you going forward? Perhaps using a similar format? That is an excellent question and would be a good time to just replug going to our website and other ways that people can sign up to learn more about this process and how to get involved at points where we'll really need the public's voice. So who wants to take that? Just quick plugs.
I can say that our organizations, individual organizations, as part of the Oregon Ocean Alliance, will be getting action alerts out to you all. And, if you are not a member of the Oregon Ocean Alliance, there is a page where you can enter your contact information. If you're already a member of Bird Alliance or Oregon Shores or Surfrider or any of the other organizations, you probably will still get an action alert from our organizations. And, we'll be targeting them around these hearings that Charlie mentioned. The first hearing, which is coming up soon, and then potentially, if the bills make it further, which they probably will, hopefully, Joint Ways and Means, which will happen a little bit further down in spring. So that will be one mechanism. And yeah, we will put our heads together, and if there's an ability for us to get together and have another event like this and give you all an update, we will. Annie or Charlie or anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think we'd probably love to hear from folks about how you heard about this webinar. We're still figuring out like how we do joint communications to the public. We're a new alliance. And like Joe said, we all have our own communication pathways with our members. But it would be great to learn how folks got here tonight, and that can help inform us as we move forward how to better and best communicate with you, or share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear back. It's a moving target for building the right audience. So we're really excited to have you guys here.
Great. So someone said they heard about it through a Bird Alliance volunteer newsletter, Land Sea Symposium, the OSCC Instagram. So yeah, bunch of great ways. So we have a couple more questions I want to make sure that we get to. And I was also going to just show people, I'm screen sharing our Alliance homepage. So you can come up and go to this contact and fill out this form to get in touch, and that is going to be a great way for us to keep you apprised of what's going on with our priorities. So we had a couple more chats or questions, excuse me. Michelle asked, are there any advantages to be put in any specific area of bills / ag versus the environment? And then also someone asked, how can we help visitors to the coast prepare them to be better stewards? So does anyone want to take either of those questions?
I can try and take that first one. I think it was referencing committees, maybe, because there's different committees. There's
so.
ag and natural resource, climate, energy and environment. Either the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House, depending on where the bill is introduced, assigns it to a committee, and they assign it to whatever committee they think it belongs in. So if it's a natural resource issue, it goes to, the natural resources committees. Yeah, sometimes there is advantage in one committee over another. You might have a friendly committee chair that really is maybe your bill sponsor. That's a really good way to move a bill. Sometimes a committee bill can be introduced even. So sometimes, yeah, without getting into too much detail, there is strategy in who is represented on each of these committees, and who you feel you may be able to influence. And so we do think about that, and we talk about that often when we think about how and where a bill gets introduced. And usually the sponsor of the bill has the best influence on the speaker or the president of either chamber in making sure that it gets into the right committee or the most advantageous committee for passage. And I already forgot the second question. I don't know if I volunteered to answer that one though.
Problem. It's someone was asking. So we have a couple more questions, and then we might move to wrap things up. So these are actually related questions. So someone asked, how can we better help visitors to the coast prepare to be better stewards? And then someone asked if a somewhat related question about educating people on kind of how to interact with the outdoors in a way that doesn't, I don't love this phrase, but love it to death sort of thing, so that people are not scaring off birds, not trampling plants. Dick,
Sure,
I
I
see
can
you
take a
raised
stab at
your
that.
hand. Would you like to jump in and take that, Dick?
I'll take a stab at it first. Obviously, if you're visiting the coast and you want to be going to some of these rocky habitats, as we've talked about, there is a great website and a little bit of a movie put out by the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department called Tide Pool Etiquette. And there's also other YouTube videos to the same sorts of titles that talk about how to be a good steward when you're at a tide pool. These are the best way to figure out what to do. In short, remember typically you're walking on organisms if you're on the rocky habitat areas. So to what degree is possible, stay on the sandy beaches. Oh, by the way, Charlie, so to introduce myself, I'm Dick Vanderschaft with the Nature Conservancy. I do a lot of work in these rocky habitats as well. So I think basically there are a lot of good resources out there you can avail yourself of before you go to a tide pool site to look at these areas. And also when you go to sites that may have volunteers there at tide pool ambassador programs at many of the marine reserves, or at Haystack Rock, which is a very well-known site in the North Coast for tide pooling. There are people there who will help you instruct you what's there and how to be good stewards. So pay attention to them, look them up, and again, do some of your own research. It only takes a few minutes. We all have access to the web, and those are really good ways to learn what's out there and how to be a good steward when you're visitors. Thanks. I'll let others take a shot at it too.
Anybody else want to?
I'll just say that, yeah, Dick, what Dick said is great. And that, you know, just to plug the Rocky Habitat bill we're trying to get passed again is, you know, the reason for that, a big reason for it is to set up that grant program so that community groups like, you know, Friends of Otter Rock or Shoreline Education Awareness down at Coquille Point or even a Haystack Rock Awareness Program, they can get more funds so they can get the boots on the ground. Because you know, signage has a role and it can be helpful, but the best way to educate people to enjoy these places with minimal impact to the habitats and wildlife is to you have people on the ground and being docents and stewards that are educating people. So if we want to really see that happen and protect our rocky habitats for generations to come, we need to really ramp up these programs, because, you know, visitation on our coasts, as anyone knows, going to the coast, especially in the summertime, you've been on 101 and the traffic can get annoying sometimes because there's a lot of people that love our coast. And so yeah, I'll just stop there.
Okay. Well, Charlie's got something more.
I was just going to put another plug in on the bill. I think that was it's a great point. The resources that Dick just immediately shared are actually really good. The tide pool etiquette, that stuff, if you need something in hand right now. I also want to highlight that, like, a lot of what, you know, Joe and others have been talking about with Rocky Habitat, there's a long, deep strategy in actually working with the tourism industry. Because we do think it's part of the responsibility of the tourism industry that is destination managing and sending folks here to improve that. And so you'll see a lot of community groups and outward facing work. I think building around, you know, the tourism industry, because we believe that we can help them once they're here, but trying to get them before they come here, sometimes that's up to another industry. So.
Well, great, folks. I think we're gonna move to start wrapping things up. Do any of our panelists have any final thoughts, final plugs? Annie, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually wanted to speak to one more question that I actually dug up in the chat. Angela Whitlock asked if we could touch on the challenges we expect in the current political climate, specifically executive orders with federal funding freezes and threats to environmental policy. It's a big question, and I would say that one of the concerns that we're seeing is that a lot of our natural resource agencies like ODFW and DLCD are largely funded by federal programs. And so, you know, the risk of some of that federal money being eliminated is scary for coastal resources. Particularly the Oregon Coastal Management Program is almost entirely funded by federal money. So we have an opportunity here in Oregon to really, like, make sure that our natural resource agencies are well funded and supported, that these programs we care about when it comes to marine reserves, rocky habitats, eelgrass management, all of those things are prioritized in the legislative session. And so that's largely what the Oregon Ocean Alliance aims to achieve in the long run. We want to build more momentum and support for ocean funding and for the state to prioritize our ocean and our resources. So I like to see it as, you know, like, there's very little that we can do about what's happening at the federal level, but it almost, like, drives, you know, the reason, or, like, it gives us more of a reason to act locally, because that's where you can make a difference.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. on a note of abject terror for the near future and hope for us organizing here locally. So yeah, unless anybody has any burning last things to say, I would just say to folks that are left listening, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you go to oceanalliance.org, click contact, and so that we can keep you posted on what's coming up in the legislative session, because we really, really do need everyone's help in achieving these wins that our oceans and nearshore environments need. Eni, I see you want to maybe have the last word.
Yeah, I was just going to note that everyone who registered for this webinar, which is everyone in attendance, I believe, we have your email, and we will send you a follow-up with the recording of this webinar. Feel free to send it out to folks, and anyone who couldn't attend, send it to your friends, colleagues, family, to get the word out there about these bills. We'll also follow up with next steps and bill numbers and all the information you need to follow the bills and take action going forward.
Thanks to Annie from Oregon Shores, Charlie Plybon and Kaya Hazard from Surfrider, Joe Liebezeit from Bird Alliance of Oregon, Dick Vanderschaft of the Nature Conservancy, and Gina Carter of Nature Conservancy, Ken Doty of Seven Capes Bird Alliance, and Ian Giancarlo of Environment Oregon. This has been great. Yeah, thank you all so much, and we will be in touch so very soon. Everyone have a great evening.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Michael.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, all.